let's get started. A little bit of introduction for both of us. So my name is Ashutosh Tiwari. I'm a senior manager in tax ignition department in KPMG. I'm based out of Silicon Valley, and I've been with KPMG for almost 10 years now. I work in the area of process transformation and automation for specifically for tax processes within KPMG, and I have worked. I have got a specialization in various technology tools like Power Excel, Alteryx, Power BI, and various robotics process automation tools, and how to use them in combination with each other to kind of transform the overall process. Thanks to my experience with tax ignition, I've been working in various different areas of tax, especially provision process, partnership compliance process, state apportionment, transfer pricing, C/C reporting, and R&D credits, etc. That's about me. Steve, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today. My name is Steve Hansen, Senior Manager in Tax Ignition. And maybe just to put today's session a little bit of context. So my educational background is actually in finance, and started my career as a financial analyst at a large bank. And probably within the first couple of months, just couldn't believe how much work I did copying and pasting data, and it just felt really tedious to me. And it really sparked kind of a change in my career from doing analyst type work to embracing kind of my love of software development and setting out on a journey to automate corporate finance departments. And so spent most of my career doing that, and now have been shifting my attention on tax departments, and have found that to be very, very challenging. But along that journey, have gained considerable expertise in Microsoft Excel and programming Excel with VBA and data warehousing and business intelligence. A lot of the stuff that kind of all dovetails in what we're going to talk about today with this great product from Microsoft. So excited to be here with you all today, and hopefully we can share some valuable insights for you. Back to you, Ash.
Thank you, Steve. So yeah, it's kind of pretty opposite for both of us. Steve started with finance and accounting background and ended up in tax technology. I started with technology and ended up in technology. And he is sitting in Florida doing this presentation. I'm in California. So let's get started. So today's kind of session is kind of a continuation of the series 1 of PNU Tax Academy series, which we did in last fall. If you remember, we did a presentation on Power Excel and Alteryx and its use in tax function process automations. We'll be continuing from that session. So you can see in learning objective, we are going to talk about various data manipulation tasks and data preparation tasks, which we do in our day-to-day work, and how the new capabilities of the Power Excel tool, Power Query, Power Pivot, etc., helps us in kind of overcoming it. We will spend more amount of time in understanding Power Query today, because both Steve and I, we feel that Power Query is one of the most amazing tool which can be a lifesaver for various tax department professionals, and if they learn it, it can kind of make their life much easier, because we all know that how much time we spend in kind of data preparation, and in the end we left out with very less time for actually kind of doing the reviews and reconciliation and decision making. If I move on to the next slide, the agenda is divided into primarily in 4 sections. We'll do a quick recap of the series 1 session, which we did on November 12th. We'll tell you what we discussed that time. So in case you have missed it, You can get a gist of that session over here. But I would recommend that you go back to your Series 1 session and look at those presentation slides and be more familiar with it afterwards. Then we'll have a deep dive into Power Excel. We'll understand the Power Excel functionalities, UIs, and various kind of capabilities of it. Then Steve will taking us through the hands-on kind of exercise case study, where we will be kind of picking up kind of a pretty messy trial balance and manipulate it using Power Query. And then in the end, we'll come back to summary and the Q&A session. You can continue to continue to pose your questions through Q&A. However, we'll take a pause at after every section, and then we'll see if there are relevant questions. We'll answer then and there. Otherwise, we'll wait for the last kind of section, the Q&A section, to answer the remaining questions. So with this, I'll get moving. As Christina mentioned, you need to kind of be ready with the Poll Everywhere for today's session. All the answers will be answered through Poll Everywhere. If you have not logged in, please log in. The details of Poll Everywhere link is given on the screen. We'll be jumping into the first poll question. Okay. So here is the first question. You can also see this question on your Poll Everywhere screen as well, which you might have opened in the browser. What are the data preparation tools do you use in your department? Option A is traditional Excel. Option B, Power Excel. Option C, Alteryx. Option D, Power BI. And option E, other data manipulation visualization tools. And April will be telling us how are we doing on poll. So please go ahead and submit your responses.
We do have a few people who have responded, and right now it seems like the trending answer is traditional Excel.
Yeah, as expected. Yeah, and that's why we have this session, so that we can kind of make you comfortable so that you can start your transition from traditional Excel to Power Excel, Alteryx, or Power BI. Moving on. So let's do a quick recap of the November 12th session. You may be remembering that we talked about how the next generation tool, especially Alteryx, Power Excel, and Power BI, help us in solving our day-to-day problem. You may be remembering that we mentioned that how we get the source data after so much of hard work from different teams, and when we receive it, it's pretty messy. I also gave you an analogy of a Lego kind of small Legos, and how we can use it in understanding how each and every tool helps us in the overall process. So getting source data, which is messy in nature, is like a kind of an entire bag of Legos. Using Power Query and Alteryx, which are data preparation tool, they are very powerful. They helps us in cleaning this data and putting them into different buckets. Then once the data is kind of in different buckets, then we can use Power Pivot or again Alteryx to prepare data models. Data model means building relationship between different tables. For example, you can have a trial balance table and you can have an account table, and you can kind of build a data model by building relationship between them by linking accounts column. And then once you have data model built, the data is easy for kind of reporting purpose. It's ready for the reporting purpose. You can pull it into Power Pivot tables within Excel, or you can push it into Power BI and create nice dashboards, etc. for kind of reporting purposes. Okay. moving on, we summarize that that we can take data from any possible sources. Both these technologies, Power Query and Alteryx, are evolving. They can connect to hundreds of different types of sources, but we know that within tax department, the most common data sources are SQL Server, CSV files, text files, or different Excel files. So you can choose any one of them, and then we basically kind of source the data from there and import it into your model. Then Power Pivot helps us in managing the data volume. It's like a small database behind Excel, and it can kind of handle large volume of data, up to millions of rows of data, in if you're dealing it with. And then process it. Again, we keep Excel in the core of the process because Excel is everyone familiar with. It helps us kind of having good reconciliation capabilities, and it also creates transparency in the process. And again, in the end comes Power BI, which gives us the drill down and dashboard and visualization capabilities in a much more fancy manner. You can use Power BI to kind of put your dashboards on cloud, or you can put it through mobile devices such as iPad or other tablets, etc. Okay. Moving on, we also covered what is Power Excel. So I explained in the last session that Power Excel is actually a combination of 4 different components. In traditional Excel, everyone is familiar with the traditional Excel and VBA macro. Some people have exposure to do some coding in VBA macro. So that's the traditional Excel. But when we add Power Query and Power Pivot to this the whole mix of suite of technology, that becomes Power Excel. And that is what we are trying to cover in today's session. Moving on, we also talked about in detail what are the 5 most common tasks which we perform within Power Excel. We discussed them and we took examples of these 5 common tasks, which was data import. Sometimes we do copy paste, but that can be done using data import using Power Query. We also talked about how much time we spend in data preparation tasks like cleaning, performing text operations, parsing data, splitting the columns. All those kind of work can be easily done in Power Query. Then we also talked about how much we love VLOOKUP formula. We take data from one table and pull and write VLOOKUP formulas and bring it into another table so that we can kind of get the relevant information in our table and then use it. Power Query can do these VLOOKUP functions using merge and join functionalities in a very, very efficient manner. One Power Query join or merge functionality can replace hundreds or thousands of VLOOKUP formulas. We also talked about Power Pivot. We love pivot table because it's very easy to use. You can drag and drop your fields into rows or columns, and you can put some filters, and it will dynamically adjust everything. However, the main challenge with traditional pivot table is that you always have to start with a big flat data table. However, when we get data from multiple sources, that may not be together. With Power Query and Power Pivot, you can actually bring them together without actually making one big flat table. And then use that in a pivot table. So Power Pivot table is much more advanced. It is much more powerful than traditional pivot table. And then in the end, we talked about some modeling best practices, how we can have error and warning flow network in our model, and how we should maintain audit trail in our process. So these were the things which we covered in the last session. In today's session, we will be specifically focusing on point number 1, 2, 3, and partially 4 as well. Okay. With that, I'll move on to the next slide. So we are now on another poll everywhere question. So if you go back to your browser and look at the poll everywhere question, the next question, question number 2 is, which component is not part of Power Excel? So the options are option A, VBA, option B, Power BI, Option C is Power Query. Option D, Power Pivot. April, do let us know how are we doing on the poll responses.
Yes, we'll let a few more people go ahead and respond. But right now it seems like the trending response is VBA.
Okay. Like how many VBA and how many Power BI and how many Power Query or others?
Right now we have about 17 people who responded with VBA. For Power BI, we have 11. Nobody responded with Power Query, and Power Pivot, we had 3 responses.
Okay, so I think it was a little bit tricky question, which is Steve put in this. Yeah, actually the correct answer is Power BI. VBA is part of Excel, traditional Excel, and it is also part of Power Excel because it is well integrated within Excel. It's Power BI, which is a separate tool by Microsoft, and Power BI also contains Power Query and Power Pivot, but it is different from Excel because it gives us ability to kind of parse data through Power Query, Power Pivot, and it gives us a tremendous ability to create dashboards and visualization. So Power BI is a visualization tool, which is different from Excel. If you go back to this particular slide here, you can see VBA is part of Power Excel. Okay, moving on. Another question. So if you go back to Poll Everywhere, the question number 3, how familiar are you with Power Query? Option A, not familiar with Power Query at all, somewhat familiar, but never or rarely used it. Option C, familiar with Power Query, but used it infrequently. And option D, very familiar with Power Query and using it frequently.
So as responses are coming in, it looks like majority at about 60% is not familiar with Power Query at all. And then coming in as a close second, around 30%, we have somewhat familiar.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. So we specifically asked this question so that we can make sure which part of the case study we should focus on. So Steve, we need to make sure that we clearly explain all the entry points for Power Query so that everyone becomes comfortable with it and start using it. Okay, so moving on. Let's get started with Power Query. So some of the things which we wanted to cover before we get into Power Query, I'll be explaining in this next section, and then Steve will take over and he will take us through in terms of how to use Power Query. So we before we get into the details, so Power Query is actually the most important tool in last 5 years of my experience with Tax Ignition. I've realized that among all the tools, Power Query is most readily available and most important tool for all the tax professionals because it can help us in kind of dealing with data transformation, data preparation steps in a very automated manner. And good thing is that once you build it for one process, you can always reuse it again and again every week or every month or every quarter, or you can tweak it and customize it for other process, and so you don't have to start from scratch every time you can leverage what you have built last time. It can do various things like define data connections and retrieving data from external files, so no more manual copy paste of data from one file to another file. Transform data, blend data, enrich data, and then output it to wherever you want. You can put it into Excel sheets through Excel tables. You can put it into pivot table, or you can feed it into Power BI as well. The good thing about Power Query is you can write a Power Query and copy paste and send it in a notepad to your colleague. You can send it to another person and they can leverage what you have done. Another thing is you can copy your Power Query which you have written in Excel and paste it in Power BI Power Query and then use it in Power BI as well. So it's very easy. You can take it from one place and use it in another place. We have quite a few kind of participants who have really liked this particular functionality. I know we have 5 different companies in today's session who are attending this session. But I would specifically like to mention National Grid team. Sam and his team, they also kind of did some more work with Power Query. They have learned a little bit more about Power Query. Sam, I think, are you on the call? I would like you to share some of your experience in terms of how your team is learning Power Query and using in your process.
Sure. Hey, Ash. My name is Sam Gulati, and I work for National Grid as their tax technology and transformation lead. And I've been in this role for a little over 2 years. We started our journey for our data journey with Alteryx, soon to realize that it is an expensive tool, although it is good, but it's expensive. And as we came to learn some of the benefits of Power Query, and one of the biggest benefit that it is embedded in your Excel, so you don't have to pay extra and everybody has access to it. We started exploring it further. It is a pretty cool tool because it helps us to transform data. It helps us automate repetitive tasks. In the past, we used to have macros to do something similar, but then of course you require to have some coding skills to do macros and stuff like that. Power Query, on the other hand, is very user-friendly. It allows you to be able to repeat those steps, change them as you need them, and allows us to kind of create efficiencies along with the group. The few areas that we have so far used Power Query is that we have used it as an underlying tool for our Power BI dashboards. So we take the data from multiple places, we transfer them, and then we kind of put dashboard around them, which is the data transformation that we do normally is basically, deleting columns, adding columns, comparing data from 2 different tables, filtering, non-filtering, and stuff like that. So again, it is we still have a long way to go, but we've just started scratching the surface on this one. And KPMG, of course, is helping us learn more and more about this. We are benefiting from these trainings that they have provided, and we are trying to use more of it as the days go by.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Yeah. So with that, I'll move on to the next slide, where we will now start a deep dive into Power Query, its user interface, how to kind of activate it within Excel. So on the screen, you can see Power Query is very much embedded into Excel 2016, 19, and Office 365. Last time we asked this question, what version of Excel you are using, and most of you said that you are either using Excel 2016 or later versions or Office 365. And that's a pretty good news because you don't need to do anything to get this ribbon installed in your Excel. It is right there available within the data ribbon of your Excel. And you can go to get and transform data section and click on the leftmost button, which is the get data, where you can basically see through all the functionalities of Power Query. Okay, but in case you're not using Excel 2016 or 19 or Office 365 and you're still using slightly older versions like Excel 2013 or 10, there are some limitations on Power Query, but it is still accessible. So if I'm in Excel 2013 and Excel 2010, Power Query is available as an extra add-in. You need to download it from Microsoft website and then install it. And once you install it, you will see Power Query appearing on the ribbon. There will be a separate tab for Power Query, and then you will have all the similar functionalities which you can see in native Excel 2016 or Office 365 as well. We'll be sharing this entire presentation, so you'll get the link to this Microsoft website as well from where you can download the tool. But the bottom line is for Excel 2013 and 10, Excel 2013 and 10, we need to do a little bit of extra effort to install it. But however, once we install it, it is easy to use. But with Office 365 and Excel 2016, it's amazing. You don't need to do anything. Just go to Data tab within the ribbon and access it. Moving on, here are some of the important settings which you should be aware of before you start using Power Query. We have included the screenshot in the slide deck so that you can always go and find these settings and update them. Okay. One of the most important setting is the privacy setting in Power Query, because the main purpose of Power Query is to bring data from external sources, right? We're bringing in data from external sources, and Microsoft has built various levels of privacy in the entire data transformation, data import process. Within your organization, you need to choose always ignore privacy level settings so that you can import your data. Otherwise, sometimes if you don't update your settings, the Power Query will run, but it will not be able to download or import your data because of the privacy constraints. Okay. And you can find this setting in query options. As I said, query option is available within this Get Data button, which I showed earlier. So if you click on Get Data, there is a query option button, and you can go there and update the settings. I think we need to kind of move fast so that we can quickly go to the case study. So I'll move on quickly. The other kind of important settings is the RAM setting and default custom load settings. You can review these things. This means when you load the data, whether the data will be loaded into a sheet by default or whether it will be loaded to data model. You can uncheck both these options so that you don't need to worry about where the data will be loaded by default. I think once you are sure that you have 5 Power Queries and only one of them is the final Power Query and that needs to be loaded into the sheet, you can specifically change the setting for that particular Power Query and the data will be loaded in the sheet. Similarly, RAM setting is something which you need to make sure you update it. In case you have a higher RAM in your laptops, you can update the settings and that will make your Power Query more powerful, because with the new generation of Excel, Power Excel, there is no limit, RAM limit on Excel or these functionalities like Power Query. You can update the maximum allowed RAM MB for Power Query, and Power Query will use more RAM and will become more powerful. Obviously, the limit is the RAM installed on your laptops, so you cannot go beyond the RAM capacity. But increasing it to the maximum allowed limit is a good way to making your Power Query powerful. Okay. There are some other settings. I'll not go too much in detail, but especially the one which is really, really important here is display the formula bar. So Power Query also has a formula bar like an Excel formula bar. Make sure you turn it on so that you can see the formula for every step in Power Query, and we'll show it to you when we go into the demo mode. Okay. With this, we've covered the initial Power Query setting aspects. Let's get into the fourth question. So go to the poll everywhere page. The next question is, on which tab do you find Power Query in the recent versions of Excel? Option A, Home tab. Option B, Insert tab. Option C, Data tab. And option D, Developer tab.
We'll give it some time for people to respond, but right now the trending response seems to be Data tab.
Perfect. That's the correct answer. Data tab is the correct answer. Power Query can be found inside the Data tab. So make sure whenever you have some time today, make sure you explore Data tab within your Excel ribbon and try this Power Query later on after this session. Moving on, so now we'll move on to the next section, and Steve will take over and will start sharing in his screen. He'll be covering how to use Power Query, and he'll be showing the demo of some of the functionalities. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, ST. Appreciate it, and thank you, Sam, also for giving us some of your insight. I think really, like, for me, and I'm sure Ashutosh would probably share the same thought. Like, the main thing today, like my personal objective would be that we inspire at least a handful of you, to just pry open Power Query and start trying to use it to automate things. And hopefully what you'll get out of this next session or this next section and the demo is just some of that confidence to inspire you to at least give it a try. So we're going to go into the some of the details about just how to use Power Query, and we're going to do it right here on using slides to begin with. But then we'll go a little further, and we'll actually, during the case study and kind of like a hands-on lab, you'll see a lot of these things covered as well. So you should get 2 doses, I guess, of about what I'm about to say. So then the next few slides, the way we thought about it is, how do you start even using Power Query if you know you want to automate it? And so they're kind of aligned with the steps generally that you go through. And really the first step is you're going to connect to some kind of data source. So as Ashutosh just pointed out, typically in most versions, recent versions anyway, of Excel, it starts on the Data tab. You simply go to the Data tab on the ribbon, and when you click Get Data, there's a few different options for the type of or category of data that you're gonna retrieve, and usually that's where you'll start. However, if you do want to jump right into Power Query itself, the highlighted option on the screen shows where you can jump off into Power Query Editor. But thinking about the data that you can connect to, I'd encourage you to just kind of hover over these different categories and see the subcategories that appear, just so you get a flavor for what you can connect to. And that's kind of what I've done here, just showing what, from the file area, what's listed from database and so on. And just generally, I would say that you're pretty much going to be able to find a way to connect to most common data sources that you experience within enterprises. For me, especially like in finance and tax, it seems so many times we're really just connecting to other Excel workbooks, and you'll probably find that you use that a lot. You'll probably find that you use the text CSV a lot. If you have connections to databases or data warehouses, you might use some of these, but I'll just kind of summarize the whole thing with you're generally going to be able to connect to data sources that you want to connect to. So after you connect to a data source, and you might go through a few steps to choose your file or specify some data source settings. The next thing that's going to happen is the actual Power Query user interface is going to be displayed. And looking at this, there's just a few things to know about. The first is over here on the left-hand side. This is your query pane. And so when you use data or you connect to a new data source in Power Query, each kind of source that you connect to is really listed here as a query. And as you click on this query, what happens is you'll see a kind of a data preview section of the data associated with that query. And then also, as you click on that query, over in this, the list of transformations that are being applied to that data source are shown in a step-by-step manner. And so it's just kind of a lay of the land. And one of the reasons that you might want to know about this, even if you don't plan on building your own Power Query automations, is if you do have to go in and kind of figure out what's going on or review like a list of steps applied to a data source, from a review perspective, this is kind of where you'll go and start looking at what's going on within that query. I guess the final thing I'll point out is a formula bar up at the top, which really displays the details being applied with the active step. So moving on, I started with connecting to data right from Excel. The thing that we're trying to show here is that once you're actually in the Power Query editor, you can also initiate the process to connecting data right from within the user interface. So for example, up in the Home tab, there's a item there called New Source, and when you click on that, the drop-down shows the exact same choices that you saw in Excel. Another simple way to just connect to a new data source is if you right-click into the Queries pane, do New Query, and you get the same exact menu again. The final thing, and this is kind of just more of a best practices tip, is that you can also, over in the Query pane here, you can also group your queries into folders. So like as you see over here, maybe you've got a bunch of Excel workbooks that you're connecting to, and maybe you got some data coming from SAP, or you could do it by data source. You might do it by kind of subsection of process. A lot of different options for like really organizing your work and making it more clear what you're trying to accomplish.
Just to add there, Steve.
Yeah, let me go back there.
Yeah, I think one thing which everyone needs to notice here is that in these two slides, the previous one and this one, Steve showed the ribbon from two different places. The first slide, the ribbon was shown from Excel, while this ribbon is shown from Power Query editor window. So Power Query opens as a separate window, which comes on top of Excel. And one of the limitations you should always remember about Power Query editor is when you have Power Query editor window open, you cannot do anything in Excel side. You need to close it before you can go back to Excel and do anything in Excel. So just keep that limitation in mind, that Power Query editor window is different from Excel, and when you are opening it, you cannot go back and do anything in Excel.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you. So now let's say we've connected to data in Power Query, and usually the next step for me is after I connect to some data and I bring it into Power Query, and I'm kind of previewing the data, is usually the first thing I do is just try and figure out what does this data look like, how clean is it, what's the quality, just by kind of assessing the data, it informs me on the steps I'm going to need to perform to transform it to the way I need. And so one quick way to do this is up in the View tab of Power Query. There's some options here, and I've displayed what happens when you choose these options in the screenshot here. So for example, there's this column quality section which will show you like how many error message or error records you have, how many records are empty or null. You have a column profile which gives you some stats on the column and things of that nature. But just really wanted to point this out. It's just a quick way to kind of gather some information about your data that you might need to address as you're constructing transformations to clean the data up. So also along those lines of assessing the data, one kind of hidden thing that you don't have to turn on per se in Query Editor is in each column there's, like you can see here, there's this green column below the column heading. And so if you hover over that, this window will appear that also shows you some information about the distribution of data. And one quick thing you can do, so particularly like maybe there's a bunch of rows that are empty and you want to get rid of those rows, you can quickly get to some of that functionality by clicking on the ellipses and then doing remove empty or remove errors or whatnot. And let's see, we're going to go to another poll. I'm sorry about the curveball I threw earlier. Luckily, this is not graded. Hopefully, this one will be an easier one. So is the following statement true or false? Power Query is able to natively connect to most commonly used data sources. Please select the correct answer.
It looks like the majority of the group is selecting A, true.
Okay, I like that. Good. All right, well, let's move on and drill a
Steve,
little. Yes.
before you move on, I have a question for you. And this is Sam.
Yes.
So when you do remove, right? If I'm correct, it removes the rows with errors in them. So if you had other data in other columns, it technically removed those rows, correct?
Yep, that's correct. So in that instance, for example, there might be times where you only want to connect where like 3 of the columns are empty. There are ways to do that, but that is a good point to know on that particular point. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. So Sam, hold me honest, because I'd like to also demonstrate like what happens if you were to do that and you realize like, oh, I just made a mistake. Did I delete all my data? Do I have to start over again? I'm going to show how we can recover from a mistake like that. So we're going to go a little deeper then into just transforming data using Power Query. And when you look at this is really a screenshot showing the 3 different tabs. We've got the Home tab, the Transform tab, and the Add column. So it's really 3 different tabs worth of features that allow you to make changes to the data. I find that it's not always intuitive where things are at. And in fact, I still want to go different places to do to do different things. And so one of the confusing things, for example, is on the Home ribbon, there's this little grouping here called Transform, but then there's also a separate Transform tab that has stuff. And so once in a while, things are maybe not where they should be, which I would agree would be a little frustration, but after a while, you'll get to finding what you need to do. But the other thing is that a lot of times it's not necessarily in the ribbon. Like if you know you need to do something to a column that you want to make some changes to, if you just right click on the data of interest or the column of interest, you'll get a context menu that a lot of times will surface like the common things that you would do in that for your particular selection.
One thing to add there, as Steve mentioned, even though if you look at the Power Query editor window, we have only these 3 tabs, but if you notice, every specific button has a drop down. I read somewhere that in total there are more than 300 types of transformation possible in Power Query. If you go and click and note down each and every drop down, there are more than 300 possible types of transformation available in Power Query. And because Microsoft is releasing new version of Power Query every month, and they are releasing these updated versions through the usual Office updates. So if you're using Office 365, you'll notice that every 6 months or every quarter, you'll have new functionalities built into your Power Query. So you just need to be more comfortable, spend more time with these ribbons, click on each and every drop-down menu and see what is there. It's written in a very kind of simple language and you will be able to understand it.
Agreed. Yep. Let's see. So the next little section I want to talk about is blending data. And really just understanding, although there's only like you'll see two things for kind of blending data together. Well, I guess three. Merging queries, the append queries, and combining files. The thing I'll point out, I just want to make sure you understand what a merge query is versus append query. And let's see, and if I think from Alteryx, which I don't use as much, I mean, append is as similar as a union in Alteryx. Merge is the same as a join in Alteryx. So if you're familiar with Alteryx, that's kind of the equivalent of those two tools. So looking at the merge query first, this is where you've got one table of data and you've got a separate table of data, and you really want to bring columns from the second table and kind of merge it onto the end of the other table. So for example, in this instance, if we've got a list of divisions with sales information, and we'd just like to bring in the name of the division so we could do some friendlier type reporting, we would use a merge query for that, and we would join on division to division to bring in the name, and that would result in a view of the table like you see here at the bottom. Similar to like what you'd do with a VLOOKUP in Excel, except much more powerful. So the second is the equivalent of a union query, and that's where you've got queries that are in a similar shape. So let's say you pull in Division 1 sales from one download, and you've got a second download of or text file or whatever. You pull in Division 2, and you just want to stack them on top of each other. So for that, you'll use an append query to do that.
Great example could be that if you have a trial balance for multiple entities, but you want to kind of process them together, you can use append query to kind of merge all the trial balances into one file.
Yep. The third option is combine files, which it's really like an append query, except with a lot more extra horsepower. So the way that you use this is you would connect to a data source, and you'd use the folder to basically point Power Query to an entire folder worth of files. And then in those files, you can create like a transformation template that gets applied to every file that you select or that's in there, and puts them all on top. It like automatically does the append query after performing a list of transformation steps applied to each file. So it's a really powerful way if you do get files in that kind of format to quickly combine them into one file, like if you're doing a consolidation type activity.
Yeah, this is kind of similar to import from a folder functionality, which is also very powerful. If you have similar types of file in one folder, you can import data from all of them using one Power Query.
Absolutely. So this is where I'm going to get back to the question you asked, Sam, or at least a tangent to that question, is understanding what's happening in the list of applied steps. So this is the pane that appears when you have a query selected over in your query pane. This will show all the steps being applied to that data source. And there's a couple of things to point out. One is if you make a mistake, let's say this last step here, I didn't mean to do that, I could just click on this X and delete that step. So really easy to delete things. The second thing is the little gear here on the right-hand side, which you can use to look at the properties. You can edit the settings of what's going on in that step. And I want to point out kind of just a best practice, because like I'm going to do this in the hands-on lab or the case study. I'm just going to create a list of steps like this. But as I do it, in the interest of time, I'm just going to create the steps without doing what is really a good best practice, which is to use the properties here to make sure you give each step a better name. Like maybe instead of rename columns 1, wouldn't that be better if it was renamed accounts or something like that, something that you knew what it was doing? And then likewise to enter a description for that step. And this has two benefits. One, it's easy to hand this off to someone else and they can understand what's going on. The second, though, is if you build this and you put it down and you pick it up 6 months, a year later, and you're like, what am I doing? It just quickly helps you figure out that, because one, you'll have a good list of descriptive names here, but then as you hover over items here, it's going to display whatever you wrote in the description. So you could have a few sentences here that if it's a really complex thing that you're doing or something really strange with your data that you got to do a particular step for, you can highlight that there and people can easily see it without kind of clicking on the gear and looking at the settings and trying to figure out what you did or what your intent was. So really great way to document what you're doing.
Yeah, it's this particular applied step window is one of the most powerful thing. It makes the whole thing very easy. It tells us what is the order of the steps, and you can actually drag the steps up and down. You can move up and down, and the Power Query will adjust itself, provided they are not conflicting steps. So, for example, you cannot reorder a column which does not exist. So when you are kind of swapping these steps, you are moving up and down, make sure there is no conflict. But technically, moving those steps is perfectly possible. And also, I want to highlight one thing here is that it's very easy to learn from making mistakes and fixing it. You will not be impacting your source data. So when you build a Power Query, nothing happens to source data. It's only reading from that data and then working on the copy of that data in memory. And one thing which I want to highlight here is one of the favorite functionality which I see in this right-click menu on the bottom right corner. There is an edit setting, a small window. You can see there is a button underneath delete. There is another button called delete until end. That's also a very easy way to kind of get rid of some of the incorrect steps. So if you click on delete until end, everything underneath navigation will be deleted. So if you want to delete more than one steps all the way to the end of Power Query, you can use delete until end.
Awesome. So let's see here. We're getting close to the end of this section. And poll number 6. Which of the following activities is not performed when Power Query when automating a data-related process?
We have responses coming in, and looks like the majority of the group is selecting D, create visualization.
Correct. Yes, this is related to the curveball question we threw earlier. So Power BI is a tool that is best suited for that, and Power BI is a standalone product from what we refer to as Power Excel. Okay, case study. Excuse me for a minute while I just rearrange some files. The first thing I'd like to do in this case study is just to demonstrate, I guess, how you go about building like a Power Query or automating something where we're going to start from scratch. It'd be the same thing that you would do. And the process that we picked is one common thing that is kind of universal for everyone, it seems like, is manipulating trial balances. Either if you have to do reporting or consolidation, or maybe you got to get it prepared for a tax calculation engine or whatnot. It seems like we see a lot of people, working with trial balances. So what we're going to do is, in fact, I'm going to have a kind of a little document here. I think you can see. And we have another demo too that is more of one in Excel. But if you ever open up Excel workbooks and you see a list of steps of all the things you have to do in the Excel workbook to run the model or whatnot, usually those are great sources of information to start understanding, but what are the things I need to do in Power Query? So for this example, we've got a trial balance. It came in a very messy format. And we're going to massage, clean the file up. We're going to do things like just general cleaning, like removing some values. We want to translate some company codes into a new merged company code. We want to change signs so that the trial balance is in debit credit format. Stuff like that. Pretty common stuff. But I think it's also a good example of, like, if you haven't used Power Query yet, and you do some of this kind of work where it's not super crazy like what you're doing, it's something that you can keep in your head, maybe a list of 10 or 15 steps. But I'd really encourage you to just try and start automating, try and start taking the first steps in Power Query. And at the beginning, it may be, if you looked at a list like this, that maybe you can only get like through this part of your automation, and then after that you got to do it manually. Just doing this part, which is, I think we're going to do this part in like probably a few minutes, can save you a lot of time, and then it's something that you can build on later. And I think if we didn't say it before, we'll just emphasize here that once you build these Power Queries, as you get new files and you have to run the process again, you just refresh the query and it will do all these steps again for you, like the same time every time, which is the benefit. So that said, let me hop into the demo here, and a couple of things. Sorry, just getting to where I want to be. So like I mentioned, and we are seeing the Excel screen, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Like I mentioned, the first thing that you do when you're building from scratch is somewhere you have to get some data. And so in this example, I do have an empty workbook, and the only thing that is in here is just the list of company codes that I want to modify. I want all of these company codes to be coded as code 130. There's no other data. There's no other hidden worksheets. It's a totally empty workbook. So to start, I'm going to do what I suggested is the first step, which is go get some data. And in this case, I'll get data from file, and I've got a really messy looking file to use. Where is it? So I've got a trial balance I've downloaded here. I'm going to open that up. And we see Power Query is opening this up behind the scenes. And once it opens the file, it presents us with a list of any of the worksheets that would be in the file. And so in this case, there's only one worksheet. I'm going to select it, and we get a preview. And so you can do a quick scroll here, and you can see it's not the cleanest file to work with. And if you've ever had to manually convert files like these to be usable, I'm sure you can appreciate how much effort it is to try and do this manually. But the reason this is a great example is because a lot of times, we'll do demos, and the data that we start with will be really clean. And then when you go to transform it, there's really not much to do. And to me, like, the most challenging stuff, and the stuff that in the past I would write a lot of VBA to do, it would be to take these messy kind of file formats and scrub them with VBA so that we don't have all these kind of page breaks and stuff like that. So I know I want to work with this trial balance data, and I know I've got transformations to do here. So I'm going to click Transform Data, and this is where I think it's opening in the wrong window. Come here.
Yeah, bring your Power Query editor window on this screen.
The next thing that happens is Power Query opens up, and I'm going to expand my queries window. And so this represents the trial balance data that we brought in. I see a preview of the data. And notice that I've got 4 different steps that Power Query has already applied. And just quickly explain what happened here. This is where we told Power Query, hey, I want you to go to this file, and that's what I want to use as a source. In the next one, it says, okay, and when you get to that, I can see here where it says, go to the trial balance worksheet. And then this promoted headers, it attempted to use the first row in the workbook as column names. In this case, they really don't provide much benefit. Likewise, it tried to infer what the data type of the columns was, and again, not really helpful here because it doesn't really do a good job guessing. And so if you want to be really explicit about things like this, you can delete these, or once in a while the promoted headers might be right, but in this case, they're not adding value. I'm going to delete those 2 steps.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing,
Sure.
Steve, there? Yeah. So I just want to remind everyone that, look, this is when Power Query makes the connection, and when we get into this mode, this is where the window we are seeing is Power Query editor window. If you make it smaller, you can see this window is on top of Excel window, and if you keep this window open, you cannot go back to Excel and edit any cell in Excel. So we need to keep that limitation in mind. Yeah, and this now you can see this entire window is similar to the Power Query user interface, which Steve explained earlier. That you have Power Queries on the left hand side, you have the data preview in the middle, you have steps on the right hand side, and all the 3 ribbons on top.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to point out here is on the view tab, I've got the column quality checked. So this bar here that is showing is because of that checkbox.
Yep.
Okay, so the first thing I like to do is, especially in a file like this, is get rid of anything that I know I don't need. And before I do that, I'm just going to do one thing. I'm going to rename the columns that I do need. And for this example, there's only 4 columns that I want to keep. And so to rename it, there's 2 things. I'll just show that. Oops, sorry. If I right click, I mentioned you get context menus that offer a lot of things associated with working with a column. In fact, in there is a rename. So I'll go ahead and select that. Another quick way is if you just double click on the column heading, you can rename. And there's just 2 other ones. I've got, where are my values at? Reporting period. Comparison period. And so after I've renamed these, I'm just going to get rid of all the other columns. I don't need them for the task I've set out to accomplish. So on the Home tab, I'm going to click Choose Columns. And unselect everything, and then just put a check mark next to Company, Account, Reporting Period, and Comparison Period. Okay, so already looks a lot better. A couple of things I know we need to do. We need to get rid of these rows that are meaningful for what we need to do. And I know later I need to merge this against an accounts table where I just need the account number. And so I'm actually going to do that first. For the account table, I want to split this column. So I'm going to use the split column feature, and I'm going to do it by delimiter. And it came up here already kind of exactly to what we need. A custom delimiter instead of some of the standard ones. And I want to split it where the minus sign is, or the hyphen. Specifically, I wanted to split only at the first one it finds. So I'll click OK. And I've got now 2 accounts, one containing my account numbers, the other containing the description. And just to be consistent, I'm going to change this back to account. And before I delete account 2, another thing that is really challenging with files like this is to understand what is the method I could use to get rid of these rows and the rows in between pages and stuff like that. Once in a while, it helps to do this analysis at the beginning. Other times you'll notice, like just by virtue of splitting that account, I now have a column that contains nothing but nulls in these kind of like page heading areas. Whereas every other column has data in it. So if I take this column and I use remove empty, I quickly get to a view of the data without all the noise going on. And so in these few steps, if I wouldn't have been talking, like it literally would have taken like 3 minutes for us to do that. Which if you've, like I said, if you've done these to try and convert them other times, that is pretty unbelievable that you can do something so quick with this tool and get to a good set of data. Like already we would have improved much more than doing it manually. So let's see, I think the next thing I was planning on doing, yes, I'm just going to get rid of this account column for, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. I guess I could kind of keep it, but oh well. And I'm going to click close and load, because the next thing I need to do is thinking in those lists of instructions, there's some company codes I wanted to replace. And so I've got that data out in Excel. And as Ashutosh mentioned, there's no way, like, you can't see what I'm doing here, but if I click on my Excel window on my menu bar or my taskbar, there's no way to get back to Excel. Like it's literally like Excel is locked until you exit Power Query. So the way that you go back to Excel is I'm going to click close and load. And what you'll see here is a queries and connection window came up. It still knows I've got that trial balance query. In fact, I still get a preview of what the data looks like. And we'll come back to that. But the next thing I need to do is I need to take this list and bring it into Power Query so I can use it with my queries. So an easy way to do that, and I'll point out that I do already have a range name set up, which isn't a requirement, but it makes it a little helpful here. And after I have that range selected in the data tab in the ribbon, I can do get data from table or range. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it basically takes that data that lives in Excel and brings it into Power Query, where we can use it as part of the process. So again, I've got a couple of steps here. One, it did change the type, which, if I recall, I don't think we needed that to happen. And the thing I want to do here, though, is I want the company and the updated company to be the names of our columns. So there's a simple button on Transform tab to use the first row as headers. When I click that, you'll notice that that is the promoted headers item that you've seen elsewhere. Okay, so going back to the trial balance then, what I want to do is bring in the updated company code. So in Excel, you would do a VLOOKUP, translate VLOOKUP here, and that means merge query. So I'll click merge queries.
So before you go into the merge step, Steve, I just want to do a 10-second recap for everyone. So what Steve has done, he connected to trial balance file and created a trial balance Power Query. Then he closed it in connection form and went back to Excel and used the account range name to create second Power Query, which is range Power Query code map, company code map. Once he has got these two queries ready with him, now he is going to merge them, which is an example of a VLOOKUP from one table to another table. Go ahead.
Yep, exactly. So I will click the merge queries, and I'm going to select company, and then I'm going to select the query I want to merge this with, and in that query I want to make this join on company. Here they happen to be the name the same, not a requirement though, they could have been named differently. The more important thing is it contains the data that you want to use to join these two tables together. And so down at the bottom here, you see that right now in our data set of roughly 14,000 rows, this is going to do join on 520 items from the trial balance.
Yeah, this is like one of the most important window everyone should remember from this session. This is a replacement of VLOOKUP, the dreaded VLOOKUP formula, which makes our workbook slow.
So I will click OK. And when I click OK, a new column does appear. And the first time you use this, it's not what you expect, because it just says table. And you're like, well, what do I do with that? That doesn't seem very helpful. So the next step that you do is you click on this, the little button that appears there. And so this is where you can expand the columns that will be pulled back. So I'm going to do that. And in this case, the only thing I want to bring over is updated company. And depending on this check mark, it'll prepend the column name with the name of the query it came from. So I'm going to uncheck it because it's already a distinct column name anyway, and click OK. And a couple of things here. Note that we've got here 52% have values, 48% are empty. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but I know we're going kind of quick here. Just wanted to pause for a second and see if there's any questions thus far, or if should I go faster or slower, or is this a fairly good pace?
And feel free to use the emoji cons located on the bottom right-hand side of your screen.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So the thing I'll point out is that this does merge, like these first ones does exactly what we want. But if I look at the ones that are null, what we really need to do is wherever this was null, we just want to use the existing company name. So that's what I'm going to try and attempt to resolve next. And when you think about that, just the words that you would use, it's like, oops. I want to replace nulls with the company name. And so just the word replace gives you the, well, let's use the replace values. And so I'm going to go ahead and click that. And we know we want to replace null values. So the value to find here is simply null. But we want to replace it with company code. And there's no way in this dialog box to say, replace with company or specify that you want to get the value there. But there is a way to do this. And so this is a little bit of a trick, one, just to be aware of, but two, because I want to just demonstrate another feature of Power Query. And so now just to flag those items, I'm going to say, okay, wherever there's the value null, just put a -1 there, which you may not think is very useful. And it's not, except for one reason. So over in our replaced value step here, the formula bar is showing the details of what happened there. And this formula is something called M. It's like an M function language. It's basically the language of Power Query. And Ashutosh is going to cover this in detail more at the end. But the main thing here is there's things that you can do with this language. Things that you can do with this language that offer more power than is exposed by the Power Query user interface. And one of those is, I really don't want -1. I would really like the value from the company column. And so there's a keyword called each, and then in brackets I can put the name of the field I would like to retrieve a data from. And so that means whenever this replace happens, it's going to go to the row that it's currently working on, get the value that it sees from the value specified, and put it over here. And just by pressing enter after I've modified this function a little bit to be a little more powerful, Power Query reinterprets that step. And now if I click this drop down, there we go. I messed it up. So I'm just going to do it without stopping to talk here. Go to replace values, and we're going to find null. And notice I just deleted that one I just messed up. Place with -1. I now see -1s, and then I'm going to make the change that I suggested we should change. And now when I click that drop down, I can see I've got all these values, all of those have been replaced. There's no -1. So it did do what we're hoping to achieve in that step. So now I've got my my updated company, and I want to use this one instead of this one. So I'm just going to select the columns that I want to keep. And it's kind of weird up here. There's choose columns, and then there's remove columns, but there's also a way to remove other columns, which says, hey, remove everything I didn't select. And in this case, I'm going to do it. And I'd like to point out something. When I selected these columns, I held down the control key, and I selected the columns in the order I want them to appear in. So now when I choose remove other columns, it keeps those columns, it gets rid of the one I didn't want, and it reordered all in one step here for me, which is kind of a slick little feature that is also a little bit hidden. Okay, so we're moving along. The next thing I need to do is, I mentioned that I want to be able to transpose these values to a debit credit format. So to do that, I'm going to need to bring in an account table. So I've got this in a separate file. So I'm going to do data, new source, go to Excel, select my list of accounts, click import. And select the worksheet containing my accounts. I'll click OK. And when this account table comes up, I just want to do a couple of things. One is some of these account types were not, they're lowercase instead of uppercase. So I just really want to get those to so that they're all using the same format. So on the transform tab, there's a text area for stuff to do to text columns. I'm going to choose uppercase, which made everything uppercase. I think for this code, we wanted to make sure it was text. And once in a while, you're going to want to do things like just remove some specific rows. Like, for example, maybe I don't want this account table. I can just get rid of that pretty easily by doing does not equal. I can get rid of this by doing does not equal. And I've got kind of a good list of accounts. And we're just about done with this section, so bear with me for 1 minute. I know also when I split this, I've probably got a space in there, so I'm just going to make sure that I don't have a space in this list of accounts. I'm going to look for the space value and replace it with nothing, just so that when I do this join, it'll join correctly. Because what I want to bring in over in the accounts table is a couple of things. One, for the debit credit format, I'm going to use this trial balance sign, but then Ashutosh is going to show some reporting. So I'm going to bring in some other columns as well. So in the Home tab, again, this is equivalent of a VLOOKUP. We're going to join to our accounts table based on account code, and we'll click OK. And then I just want to use a few things here. I want to use description, I want to use account type, and trial balance sign. I think just to make sure we have some time here, I'm going to make a few shortcuts here instead of do everything that I had planned. And Ashutosh, I think you can, if you could just confirm, for your part of the demo, you're going to start with your own workbook. Is that correct?
Yeah, which is a copy of what you'll
Okay.
be finishing up with. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me, just so we make sure we have time, let me do the last thing, which is I want to show how you actually would flip the signs on one of these columns. And so to do that, you can add your own columns using this tab. And I'm going to choose custom column. And I'll just call this debit credit format. And in this, we just can enter formula for, well, how should we define the data in that column? So all we need to do in this example is take the, let me do one thing before I do. Is I want to make sure that this trial balance sign is in fact being interpreted as a number, and it is. Okay. So we'll do custom column, we'll do debit credit format, and then we'll specify the formula we want. So I'm just going to do this only for the reporting period, and I can double click on my list of available columns here to use it in my formula. And then I'm going to multiply that by trial balance sign and click OK. And maybe I think for the purposes, again, to just, I'm sorry, because I feel like I want to make sure we get to some other topics we have planned. But I think we've covered a lot of the primary things that you do when you use Power Query to transform data, to connect to data, to merge data together. And with that, I'm going to pause here for a few questions, and then maybe while I'm taking questions, if Ashutosh, you want to bring your screen up and take it from here.
Yeah. I think that's a right point. So, though we have a Q&A session towards the end, but right now, because we discussed the merge functionality, which is a replacement of VLOOKUP, if people have any questions, please go ahead and ask the question, and I'll try to kind of start sharing my screen.
And feel free to use the unmute button that's located on the bottom ribbon of your WebEx screen. And if you're dialed in, you can hit *6. We also have the Q&A function in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen.
And Steve, this is Sam again. And just to confirm that the merge function is kind of VLOOKUP in both directions, correct? Like it will basically merge the two data sets. It's not like you just do VLOOKUP and it would not give you the data that's missing, correct?
You can, it's both ways in a sense. It can take it can look up data from one table to another table. It doesn't matter whether you are looking up in table 2 or table 1. You can do it both ways. You can appropriately choose left join or right join or inner join, and then pull in the data. Does that answer your question?
Again, in VLOOKUP, it's like one way, right? You do a VLOOKUP, it only looks up data from one table from the other one. Here, you can do inner, and it can kind of compare both of them together, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just I wanted to bring it out, make sure that.
Yeah. Thanks for highlighting that, Sam. Okay. Yeah. So let me share my screen again. And I'll get the presentation once again. Are you able to see my screen? Or maybe not. Let me try again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it should be coming up now.
Yep, there it is.
Okay. Let me go to the full presentation mode. Okay, so now that we have kind of covered some part of the case study, I wanted to make some extra steps in advance of kind of whatever steps Steve performed. So I have that file open on my side as well, and let me bring it on the screen here. So this is where Steve left off. He has got his master data, the list of companies, and then he loaded the clean data, which had those two merged done in this Power Query here. So if I go to the edit window, let me bring in the Power Query editor. It's on another screen. Give me 1 second. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so if you go back, we have all these three kind of Power Queries in here, and we have all these steps. So first thing which I wanted to cover is I want to cover two different topics. One is to give you a little bit of peek into the M code, the Power Query language code, and I want to prove it to you that how easy it is to understand if we know how to decipher it. It's plain English, and we don't need to write it from scratch. The most of the time I use Power Query Advanced Editor is when I want to tweak a particular step, and that's where we need to understand how it is used. So we will understand how these steps, formula bar and Advanced Editor, are used in tandem with each other, and then how we load this data into a Power Pivot table. I mentioned about the biggest advantage of this is pivot table, right? Unless you get the data in pivot table, how will you able to get good reporting out of it? So going back to this accounts table, so I kind of noticed in here is that these are some of the steps which Steve did perform on this kind of section in here. What I want to notice here is when I want to kind of process our data and summarize it based on the account type, I can see that there are some additional columns, like there is a column called account type, and there is a column called account description, which is available. So what I will do is I'll make sure these two columns are good or not. So let me click on this drop down here, and I can see that though we have the entire account mapping, but the data quality, as always common in tax department, the data quality is not good. You have revenues and liability and expenses mentioned twice, one in caps and another one is small letters. So what I can do is I can clean up this column so that this will help us in doing the reporting easily later on. So let me do one thing. I can use the functionality in transform ribbon. I'll select this column. You can see this column is selected, and I will change the formatting and I'll make it uppercase. You can see there are many options in here. Right now, I'm just going to use uppercase. And then now I will have a much cleaner account mapping table with everything in capital letters so that they're not kind of creating problem when we are trying to use them in the pivot table. Because revenue with the small letters and revenue in capital letters should be clubbed together. So if I click on this now, you can see everything is in caps letters. Okay, and then next step I can do is we have got some nulls as well. So I'll remove the null here and then click OK. So you can see I have got one step added in this accounts table, filtered rows. So all the nulls are filtered out, so that any account number with missing account type is not flowing into the trial balance mapping table, trial balance table. So with this, I can do close and load, and our accounts table will refresh, and then I can go back to the trial balance table. You can see it's because I'm sharing my screen, there is a little bit of lag, but you can see the account table is getting refreshed because I added 2 more steps in the accounts Power Query. Now I'll go back to trial balance query, edit this trial balance query. So we have got all these steps which Steve performed, including all the way in the end to kind of added custom columns. And then he did some grouping to reduce the number of rows based on the account number and sorting them in a particular order. But what we can do here is we can see that there are 2 merged queries, the steps in here. One is the first merge query, which Steve did with the company code, where we were trying to replace the old company code with the new company code. And then the second merge query is where Steve is doing a join with accounts table to bring in the trial balance signage, and he was multiplying it with the signage so that he can convert the numbers into debit credit format. So on this step, I can edit this query and change it slightly. So I'll click on this cogwheel on the right hand side. And then you can see the account is matched everything perfectly. So the mapping is correct. I think I need to change the number of columns which I want to bring in. So actually it's the next step, the expand accounts column. So I click on this cogwheel for the expand accounts table. And here I will do is I will add one more column called accounts type. Let me just see, accounts type is here. And then account description. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing these 2 additional columns in my information. So there was account description already present in trial balance, but Steve removed it. But I am going to bring in the account description from accounts table. And also I want to bring in the accounts type. So when I click that, you can see it takes a little bit of time because we are using the source file from a shared drive, and it's taking a little bit of time in refreshing that. So you can see I can go and click on each step to make sure all the Power Query steps are still working properly. If there is any error, I can go back and fix any of these following steps because I changed the expand accounts step in the Power Query. Then I can go to the added custom. I think everything is good up to this point. And so in the group row, I can see the account type is again missed. So I will edit this step as well and bring those 2 additional columns. So add grouping. This is like a SUMIF in Excel. What I want to do here is bring in the accounts type column so that we can create pivot table out of it. And once I do that and then click OK, I'm editing the steps which Steve performed. I think sorting row is rows is just a presentation step, so it's not going to kind of have an impact. So you can see all the steps are working perfectly fine. And when I close and load and go back to Excel, I will see that one additional column, account type, will be flowing in here. So let me click on close and load. So all this trial balance Power Query will refresh once again. And then the fifth column, which is account type, will get loaded in here. And that will make us ready for the other two topics which I want to cover. So while it is refreshing, I can bring back the slide quickly. One of the things which I really want to show is this one. So once we have this, the kind of pivot, the trial balance query loaded into the data model, then we can use this table and bring it into a pivot table, and then start creating a pivot table and slice and dice using the slicer. So let me show it to you how we can do it in Excel. So if I go back here, you can see the Power Query is refreshed in the meanwhile, and the new column, the accounts type column, is already present here. So this is the extra column which I added on top of what Steve had imported. Now, because if I look at this Power Query and click on load to, we can see this step is not loaded in data model. This Power Query is only loading into sheet 1, into this green table which you are seeing. But if I click on this step, that's where the uh, the other product comes into the picture, which is called Power Pivot. Okay, so I click on this. Yeah, it is saying that this will be deleted and it will be refreshing again. So Power Query and Power Pivot are like brother and sister. Power Query brings in the data, and then we can build the data model in Power Pivot. I'll show it to you once the data is loaded. Yep, data is loaded, and now we can go and explore the next step, which is Power Pivot. So you can see in my Excel, there is another ribbon called Power Pivot, and there is a button called Manage Data Model. If I click on this Manage Data Model button, it will give us a new window. And this is where we will see, first time we'll see how Power Pivot data model looks behind the scene. It's a database behind your Excel file, which is retaining lots of data in a very compressed format. It compresses your data to the factor of 10. Let me see, where is it going? It's taking a little bit of time to kind of, maybe because I'm sharing my screen. Okay. That's not what I expected. Window needs to come up, I guess. Anyway, I guess essentially what I wanted to show you in this Power Pivot model is there is an option to create a pivot table. And when we create the pivot table, we can bring in the entire data set into our data model in a very kind of easy manner. Let me see if I can, I have another model open, and let me see if I can do it there. Looks like, oh yeah, I can show it to you in another model. It's opening up in another file. It's on the another screen. I can show it to you. I have so many windows open. I think that's kind of causing a little bit of problem. Bear with me. You can see the window is opening. It's taking a little bit more time. So while it is trying to open, I can go back, flip back to the slide deck and cover my slide, and then show it to you in Power Pivot. So the other thing which I wanted to show to you is the M language. Steve explained you the Power Query editor window, and then he explained you all the applied steps on the right-hand side. But I wanted to show you that these steps are actually each and individual steps can be seen in the formula bar. And then if you go to the advanced editor window, you can actually see the entire code as well. And I have listed down all these steps in bullet points at the bottom, but I want to show it to you how you will go into it. So on the Power Query editor, the first thing you do is click on Advanced Editor. Okay, once you click on Advanced Editor, it opens this window. Okay, this window gives you each and every, it gives you the entire code for your Power Query, all the steps listed in here. And if you look at these steps on the right hand side are exactly matching the steps in here. So if you look at this, the Power Query, you have source, navigation, promote, rename, merge, expand, reorder, filter. Those are the same steps applied here as well. Okay. So all these things are corresponding. Each row represents one step in Power Query. Then the next thing we can understand is the code shows that we are trying to connect to a trial balance file. So the trial balance file source path is mentioned here, and we are trying to pull data from SAP output tab, which is a sheet. And then the most important thing which you need to learn here is every Power Query step is connected from previous step, and it is being referred. So you can see navigation is a second step in Power Query, but when we create the third step, promote headers, it is being used as a reference point for performing the promote header step. So you can see all these things are interlinked. You can see navigation is linked to navigation, promote is linked to promote, merge and link to merge, and so on and so forth. And in the end, this is how all Power Query steps are linked to previous step. Reading these steps is also very easy. Rename step has got a table.rename column function, and then you can see that we are trying to rename period column to month column. Okay, and then there are other things as well. If you read these steps, you can understand them easily and you can make edits to it. I'm trying to explain these things not to make you a pro in M language, but the reason I'm trying to explain it to you so that you can read it and then edit it or fine tune it to make your Power Queries more perfect, like the way Steve used it by replacing -1 with the other column and brought in that value. And the last thing is, last step is treated as an output of Power Query. So because filter is the last step in the Power Query, so the result of filter is the result of the entire Power Query transformation. And all these steps are captured inside the let and in row. So let means the transformation begins, and in means the transformation is completed, and the filter or whatever step is mentioned after in is the output of Power Query. So it's not very difficult. If you spend a little bit of time with it, you'll be able to understand it. Let me see if I have my Power Pivot responding. No, it looks like it's not. Okay, apologies there. I guess my Excel didn't respond because I have so many files, and also I'm sharing my screen. How much time do we have, Steve?
We are at, let's see, we have 13 minutes left.
Okay.
So we're about on schedule.
Yeah. So I can basically go to this summary section. Okay. Before we go to the summary section, we have another poll question. Let's all of you please go to the poll everywhere page in the web browser. The next question is, Power Query Advanced Editor allows you to, option A, create macros for Excel. Option B, edit Power Query steps using the M language. Option C, using SQL to construct stored procedures. Option D, create data visualization dashboards.
As responses come in, a strong response has been selected for edit Power Query steps using the M language.
That's the correct answer. That's what I was discussing earlier. The advanced editor is for editing Power Query steps. Moving on, so we can go to the closing thoughts. So as I mentioned, I'm trying to show that particular slide once again, that we can use Power Query to bring in data from most of the common sources such as SQL Server, CSV files, text files, or multiple Excel files individually, or multiple Excel files within a folder, and then perform all these common steps like copy paste, data preparation steps, merge data steps, and reporting with Power Pivot table step can be done using Power Query and Power Pivot. Power Pivot. One thing which I wanted to show you in Power Pivot demo is what is the difference between the traditional pivot table and Power Pivot table. So in traditional pivot table, we can only have one table as a source. However, in Power Pivot table, we can load in data from multiple sources through multiple tables and put them into Power Pivot data model, and then build a relationship between them and use them into the pivot table. So that makes the overall data transformation and reporting process much easier. And you don't have to end up with you don't have to necessarily create a big flat data table to feed into your pivot table. You can have multiple tables feeding into your one common pivot table. Okay. So that's pretty much it. Summarizes our session. We have one more last poll question. Which is this: based on the material presented, how likely you are able to you consider or recommend the use of Power Query? Please go ahead and answer your question.
It seems like we have kind of a 50-50 split. Some people are saying somewhat likely, but need more information. And then we have some people saying very likely.
Very good. Yeah, I think as I said, we are trying to bring as much as familiarity as possible within this 2 hour session. But obviously, the more time you spend with these tools, that will help you in becoming more comfortable with this tool and using it in your day-to-day life. This is a game changer in terms of your normal data preparation task in your day-to-day work. Use it as much as possible so that you get rid of the fear of technology, which you usually see whenever we try to adopt a new technology. It's free. You don't need any license. It's most probably present as a part of your Excel within your organization. So just use it and become more comfortable with it. I think that's pretty much it. What is this everywhere checkout, a poll everywhere checkout option?
Yep, we just want to make sure that before everybody drops off that they check out and poll everywhere.
Yeah. And then parallelly, we can open for Q&A session and people can ask questions if they want to.
And feel free to unmute yourself. You can also raise your hand, or you can use the Q&A box if there are questions.
Ashutosh, there's a question about someone that was having a problem with after retrieving data from Excel, hitting close and load, and they were receiving a message. So I don't know if that is anything you have encountered.
Can you read the question? I think I'm not able to see the Q&A section. Yeah.
Let's see. Well, Sonia.
This is Sonia from Dominion Energy.
Yeah, go ahead, Sonia.
After I hit close and load, I get a Microsoft Excel error message. And it says data could not be retrieved from the database. Check the database server or contact your database administrator. Make sure the external database is available and then try the operation again. And in Power Query, I'm just pointing to a folder location on our shared drive. And then I transform the data by just applying a few steps. And I get that error message after hitting close and load.
Are you using multiple files then that are coming in? So you're loading them all at once using combined files? Okay. Well, I sent you my email address as well in case we need to maybe connect offline to do a little more debugging, but I suspect there's some kind of issue with the files connecting to. There's probably one in there that is not of the same schema or the same kind of layout as the other files. And when you're doing the initial like transformation steps, it really picks one file that you specify those steps on, and it may be trying to specify those steps to the other files when you do the close and load, and that's where it's hitting a file that is causing that issue. It's kind of what I'm thinking off the top of my head.
And there was something mentioned about database administrators. I guess I think somehow one of the files is making the connection to SQL database for which you may not have access to. So that could also be.
Okay, I can also reach out to our IT group.
Yeah,
and find out.
I think when we are trying to learn Power Query, start with connecting to one file first, and then slowly build more Power Queries to connect by connecting to other sources individually one by one. And once you're comfortable with that, then you go ahead and connect to a folder.
Got it. Okay, I'll try one by one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other question, Steve? I can't see the Q&A window.
Let's see here.
Or people can unmute and ask the question. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Maybe.
All right, well, if there's no other questions, I'd like to thank y'all for joining us today. And I know when you get to this kind of second series, especially from a technology things can go a little deeper, and especially if you aren't touching the keys, it can be hard to follow along. And would encourage you to reach out to us if there's anything that we can help with or for other questions. But hopefully we've inspired at least a few of you to, like I said, crack up Power Query and start automating some of your processes.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Hope to hear from you in future.